The next submission is an oral presentation by Prevent Cancer Now, is outlined in CMD 15H 5.7. I understand that Dr. Sears will make the presentation. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Meg Sears. I'm an adjunct investigator with the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute. I am specializing in environmental health. I was originally trained in chemical engineering, actually, but now, for the last over a decade, I've been working in epidemiology, toxicology, and I've had diverse experiences in environmental issues. I also co-chair a civil society organization called Prevent Cancer Now, and Prevent Cancer Now has made previous submissions to this panel regarding SRB. So, without repeating the kinds of things that you're hearing from other groups, I'm trying to fill in how I may assist you with my expertise in both in the epidemiology end of it and the and data, because one of my big interests is data, particularly in epidemiology, but also in environmental monitoring. So I'm going to speak to two issues. The first is low dose effects. And it's very true that if you are not stressed with anything else and you have a small stress as a result of some kind of environmental contaminant or insult, that your body responds. I've had CIHR funding and looked at toxic metals. If you are dosed with a very small amount of cadmium, then your body responds by producing the protein that it needs to kind of wrap up that cadmium and take it out of your body. And there are good effects seen that are associated with these physiological responses. Your body's pretty smart. It tries to take care of you. But you know, everybody put up their hand if you have no stresses in your life. That's something that you see in a lab, but that's not reality. And it's not a good approach to public policy. So when it comes to radioactive exposures, the assumption is made in public policy that, you know, less is best. And so the no threshold approach is a very realistic approach, and I don't think that there's any reason to think that we should be taking any other approach than that to really try to minimize exposure of the citizens and of the environment to environmental contaminants, particularly the tritium. The second issue that I have has to do with data quality. And it was only today, actually, that I found the second SRBT website where they actually do have this data. There's another website that really doesn't have very much, and by the luck of Google, I guess, I ran into the wrong website to begin with. But I have to definitely agree that having downloadable data that would be useful to a toxicologist or somebody who wanted to do mapping or anything like that would be very, very helpful. The PDF data doesn't have all the numbers in it and so on. You can get your bank statement and your telephone bill and everything else offline in downloadable data, like CSV format types of things. So I don't think that this should be a very big deal, but it would be extremely helpful, presumably to your staff as well as to the public, and I would think anybody else who was interested in environmental research. And that's something that I've been looking at, is how you can mesh environmental data with health data. And so that's the other half of it. Is, do we have good data on the kinds of outcomes that you might expect in terms of health outcomes within this area? And I gather that quite a while back, there was a presentation from Lynn saying that there were some concerns in this area with colorectal cancer, but I haven't tracked down that data. It would be helpful to have the urine data, for instance, and if people have wells that are impacted, then perhaps offer that as a public service as well. But this data, worker data, there may be issues of confidentiality, but those can be dealt with in terms of, giving, but you can't just give you can't just give averages or medians. You have to give an indication of the spread of the data. And the spread of the data is something that really shows up when you look at both the well monitoring data and the vegetation data. Because when I examined that data, from one site, from 1 year, there is tremendous dispersion of this data. So one day there'll be a very high level, one day there'll be a very low level. And as somebody who deals with data sets and statistics, if you have a very small number of measurements, but they're very broad, the chances of you having picked up the highest one within this small number of samples is actually pretty low. So rather than saying, oh, well, we took a bunch of samples, that was an outlier. No, that is a sign that you may be missing something very important. So I would really encourage you, as an approach to environmental monitoring data, to look for red flags as opposed to being kind of placated by saying, well, that was a bad day, but generally we're all right. Because maybe you just miss a lot of bad days. We don't know. We don't have that data. The data quality for the vegetation is very, very poor. And finally, the last thing I would say about data is I would just remind you of what we said in our submission, which was taken from page 47 of the SRB submission, which is the groundwater tritium concentration in residential wells contributing to public dose. And yes, it did go down somewhat until about 2012, but that's flatlined. We're not seeing improvements in the last few years. So to say that everything is fine, it's getting better and better and better, the data is not telling us it's getting better and better and better. So keeping that in mind, I think that 10 years, seeing as how it's flatlined, is probably too long. And it would be very good to readdress progress in this area in the much nearer future than to wait for another 10 years going out. With that, I would, Prevent Cancer Now has also submitted other recommendations in terms of worker and public education and the making testing available to citizens, and we would support recommendations by others regarding the how this type of facility would be better in a more isolated area. I'd be more than happy to take any questions.
Thank you.